Perfect. Brilliant. So without any further ado, welcome everybody to our final panel of the day, the taboo panel. I just want to extend gratitude to all of our delegates for joining us today, and apologies for that. That's actually the Amazon parcel man with a very timely delivery for me, but that's okay. It's my pleasure to be in conversation with all of you today. We'll be discussing how to amplify and center women's voices to break the silence on issues that for far too long have been considered taboo in our workspaces. So we'll be covering topics such as inclusive policy and practice, which speaks to menopause, fertility treatment, flexible childcare, mental health, to name just a few things, as well as emotional intelligence, which obviously is always an undercurrent to these kinds of conversations. Before we get started, though, I thought it was really important for us all to share with our delegates who we are, how we self-identify, so that they are aware of our positionality, and of course how our own identities inform our conversations. So I will kickstart us off and introduce myself as Dylan. I am the learning experience designer for Equality Leaders. My pronouns are he, him, or she, her. I self-identify as a South African, white, gender fluid gay man who is an immigrant and privileged enough to have been university educated and have English as my native language. Oge, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you for having me. So my name is Oge Jizu, and my pronouns are she, her. And it's always a bit challenging to kind of do this kind of self-identifying part, but I identify as a Black British woman that is from Nigerian heritage, which I love and celebrate. And kind of my work background is in the charity sector. I recently fallen in love, I would say, with inclusion and diversity. And yeah, I'm really excited to lend my voice to this conversation.
And thank you so much, Oge, for bringing your voice. We are grateful. Kat, how about yourself?
Hi, thanks, Dylan. My name is Kat Holmes. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a senior data leader, most recently with ITV, and I'm the founder of Menopause X. Our tagline is data analytics for well-being, which kind of sums it up quite well. I'm joining today from London, where I've lived for the last 7.5 years. I am originally Australian. I self-identify as a gay woman with a disability, and I'm going through menopause. So I'm trying to be a real model, as our previous panel talked about, in the workplace, in all of those areas. And I'm super excited to be here today too.
Thank you so much, Kat, for showing up for all of us and for our delegates. Shamini, how about yourself?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is my first time speaking on one of these panel events, so got the nerves here. But my name is Shamini, and I'm born and brought up in London. I'm of South Asian descent, and I was one of the fortunate few to be privileged enough to go to be the first of my family to go to university. I studied maths, hated it, somehow landed myself in insurance, and I work at Aviva as Aviva's inclusion partner, and previously was co-chairing the Multicultural Network for 2 years.
Thank you, Shamini. And last but certainly not least, Ravina. Ravina, are you there? Can you hear us? Oh, I think perhaps Ravina's Wi-Fi has gone on the blink. Ravina?
As I said, I am having.
That's okay. Can you hear us? And would you like to introduce yourself?
Can you hear me? Yes, sorry.
We can hear you now, yes.
Sorry, as I was saying, I am having a few technical difficulties, so my apologies for that. But my name is Ravina Dadwell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the DE&I Wellbeing and Engagement Coordinator here at S3. I was the first in my family to go to university. I am an Indian woman who was privileged enough to be in a job that I absolutely love at the age of 25, which I know is a real honor. And I love DE&I, and it's worked its way into both my professional and my personal life, because I write articles for blogs and online magazines, and I host a show on a community radio station, providing a platform for artists from historically excluded groups.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ravina. So I guess I wanted to jump straight in, and perhaps Kat, I can come to you for this, because it is very much around data, etc. But recent research conducted by Research Without Barriers published a report in January this year, and their research found that more than 1 million women in the UK could be forced out of their jobs in 2022 because their employers are failing to support them. The women surveyed said it was the second most devastating impact on their career to date. We're discussing menopause. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Only just behind having children. Almost 75% of women who took part in this research said that their workplace did not have a forum where they could talk openly about menopause with their colleagues, exacerbating their feelings of isolation and distress. So my question to you, Kat, is what role does data have in this discussion, right? And what needs to change, right? How do women need to be supported?
Those are two big questions. Let's take the first one. Data in most forward-thinking organizations now underpins all kinds of business decisions, whether it's the customer user experience or a financial planning and so on. And I think HR matters and DEI matters are no different. And Satya Bala was talking about this in the last panel. So in this particular instance with menopause, we need to turn to the data to really understand what the cost of menopause is to the business, so that there is enough impetus to put in place that kind of support. So data is absolutely critical to moving the conversation forward. Stories combined with data, we find, is the best way to make an impact. I'll quickly answer the second one, but they're two quite separate topics. So I suspect the other panelists might want to jump in on either topic. I think one of the things we need to do is we need to disrupt the idea of what normal work culture needs to look like. And luckily, the pandemic has helped us with that. Norms of how of what's appropriate to share at work, how we have our work persona and our personal persona, and they're quite different. These aren't helping those conversations. So those norms were built by a certain demographic decades ago, and those norms no longer are serving either the companies or the people that work for them. So absolutely, we need to start blurring the lines.
Absolutely. And, these conversations or actions that need to be taken, they create a lot of discomfort, especially, and that demographic that you're alluding to, let's just call them, right? Let's just say how it is. White, middle-aged, middle-class men, right? Someone like me, for example, although I'm not middle-aged, thank you. It's incredibly uncomfortable, right, to be discussing these topics, but we need to be having these open conversations, right, if we're going to create some sort of change. So how do we go about that? And I guess this is a question to the panel, but Kat, feel free if you would like to kind of kickstart us off.
I think Oge actually has some really good things to say based on a chat we had earlier a few weeks ago, didn't you? I think I'd like to hear from you on that one.
Thank you. I guess for me, even following on from the previous panel discussion about data, I think sometimes we can fall into this pitfall of assuming data paints the whole picture. And I think data is a good starting point. Both qualitative and quantitative data is a good starting point. But I think there is bigger pieces of the picture that needs to be examined in terms of looking at what needs to change. So if we talk about culture a lot in organizations and what is our organizational culture. And I think if you have a particular way of doing things that benefits a particular group of people, then I think that's where you can start in terms of implementing real change, in terms of looking at what are some of, as Kat was saying, what are some of the disruptors? What are some of the things that we can do to kind of start to disrupt those systems and those points of power? And how can we start with those small changes to bring kind of holistic change? Because I think the problem is sometimes people see this is a problem and we need to attack it all at once. And I think taking a step back and really examining where are the main pain points and how can we make tangible transformational change in those areas is a good starting point.
Thank you so much, Olga. What are your thoughts on this, Shamini? How can leaders, colleagues, organizations, generally speaking, better support women when it comes to menopause or mental health or flexible childcare?
So I'm under the opinion that I think conversations are really important, just open conversations. I don't think we have enough of them. I know we're starting to have them and we're getting better at them. But if you don't talk to one another and you don't understand and listen to each other's needs, how are there going to be any changes that are positively going to impact anyone in the workplace, regardless of gender? So for me, it's all about, I guess, the initial step anyway. Understand what one another needs.
I'm not sure if we've lost Shamini. We can't hear you, Shamini. But to your point, you're absolutely right. I think that is incredibly important. And if I may, perhaps one step before that even is making sure that leaders understand that they should be role modeling, right? This change, this behavioral change that we want, and they need to be able to create spaces in which people feel safe enough, right, to open up about these very personal, deeply personal experiences. Ravina, what are your thoughts on, what needs to change? What has your experience been like?
Yeah. Thank you, Dylan. So I think mine is probably threefold, not to go in with too much information. But first of all, I think it's really important to consider the intersectionality piece because, all women's experiences, for example, regarding menopause and, mental well-being and other, topics that are traditionally considered taboo aren't going to be singular. And I think it's important that we don't look at these things in a very binary way, but we open it up because otherwise, when you're kind of speaking and discussing these things, you don't want to feel like you have the weight of your whole community on your shoulders because your experience may be very different to that of your kind of white counterpart, for me, for example, or, other different historically excluded groups. So that I think is important to consider. And I think the best way to do that is by looping in groups like ERGs and making sure that you are including kind of as many people as possible into the conversation in order to get that diversity of thought. I think that can have a huge impact. The second thing I think is really having a dedicated resource. So DE&I is just as much of a specialism as legal or finance, and you wouldn't have someone who'd watched a law documentary represent you in court. So you wouldn't have, just the same way you wouldn't have someone who, you know, reads DE&I blogs give you a strategy for DE&I in your organization. So I think having that dedicated resource really means opening the doors up to these conversations and topics and ensuring that we've got a real kind of embedded systemic approach to DE&I in your organization.
I like what you said there, Ravina. I do want to come back to pushing the data, Barrow, probably because I'm a data geek. Menopause X has just completed a small survey specifically on the impact of menopause in the workplace. And 47% of respondents had altered their work in some way due to menopausal symptoms. And this could have been prevented. 18% said that it would have been preventable if there had been more support. So absolutely, conversations are important. If I think about my own journey, I got very sick last year with menopausal symptoms, and I had a great support from my line manager. And that was helpful, but there wasn't a structure, a clear policy around how to make reasonable adjustments for people going through the menopause. And I think that's where we need to go next. We need to look at the cost to the businesses of not having that in place, whether it's loss of productivity, people exiting the workforce, often who are in quite senior positions by that age, the loss of corporate knowledge, the loss of diversity up at C-suite and board level. These things are having an impact on your business right now. And it's really important to, yes, have a safe space within individual teams and the line management. It's also important, as Ravina said, to have specialist D&I, either roles or consultancy to move that along. 51 menopause affects and childbirth affects 51% of the population, and in some businesses it's 70% of your workforce. In some it's lower, but these are genuine things that don't belong just in the private sphere.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much, both Kat and Ravina, because I think this kind of goes back to what a previous panel of ours was discussing. We as humans, as individuals, right, cannot be expected to leave parts of ourselves at the door depending on where we find ourselves, right? And so I think, you know, the pandemic has in many ways kind of conflated or combined in many ways the private and the work spheres, and that's brought with it opportunities, right, to change the narrative, to make this change happen. But I guess my question is, you know, we've said just how important it is to be having conversations about this, right, like we are today, just how important it is to be creating those safe, brave spaces. But what does this look like in policy? How do we translate that into a policy and practice, right? Because people will come back to us and say, well, I get all of this. It's all very fluffy and very lofty, but I need something tangible, right? So how do you think we can navigate that? Oge, perhaps I could come to you without putting you on the spot, of course.
Yeah, I think Kat mentioned it earlier about having policies that reflect people's experiences and also reasonable adjustments. So how does what people are saying and what the data is showing, how does that translate into a policy? So is there a reasonable adjustment policy that your organization has that covers each of the things that people go through, or what the data is showing is the main pain points or people's experiences. What does your grievance policy look like when, you know, those reasonable adjustments aren't met? How do you as an organization hold yourself accountable to make sure that you are making those adjustments and listening to what people need? I think one thing that the pandemic has showed us is that these things are possible. It is possible to do things at pace, and to do them well. And I think, although I said before, you know, sometimes you need to take a step back and think, I do think that sometimes there are things that can happen at pace. So looking at your suite of policies, and as Ravina was saying, how do those policies, do they have an intersectional lens? Are we looking at it from an intersectional perspective? So are they disproportionately creating inequitable practices within the workplace? How are our policies actually translating into the reality of people's experiences? And I think that would be the best, for me, the best starting place in terms of reviewing and looking at your policies.
I agree. And I think we also need to move into practice, so the two can happen concurrently. I'm just going to throw out a bunch of random examples based on the stories that we hear at Menopause X. Satya talked in the last panel about how we don't have to wait for it to be top down, and DEI can come from bottom up. And I totally agree with that. In this particular instance, I think that we need to start, the boards need to be held accountable. So management boards have to have a zero tolerance. I have an example from a very high level management board meeting, not my own, but someone who confided in me that the head of the chairman of the board said, "Oh, we don't want that person, that woman on the board because she's at menopausal age." So that kind of stuff has to stop in 2022 dead. So as Oge said, there's lots that you can do quite quickly. You can do that right now by issuing a zero tolerance to any kinds of jokes around the menopausal experience. They might have been funny 10 years ago, but we've moved on. So, and so that's one practical example. The other is that I think that when we understand about what an inclusive workplace looks like in practice, and it's not just about those going through menopause or those who have recently had children, it's every staff member and how they can bring their best authentic self to work to be most productive. I'm talking about the corporate world, of course, and not the not-for-profit sector, of which I have no experience. In the corporate world, we are employed to deliver business value. We can best deliver business value when we have a structure in place that helps us be the most productive, which is authenticity, which is adjustments, which is a supportive work environment. Those things can take time, but putting concrete markers in the ground now and saying, well, we're going to be here by year one, we're going to be here by year two. So practice along with policy would be my advice.
Thank you both. And I think, you know, recognizing that practice is important, progress over perfection, right? I think there's this fear for many people that, well, I'm not going to do anything just yet because I'm not ready. I don't know enough. I'm not sure what the implications or the consequences are going to be. So I'm not going to do anything at all. And so there, we don't see any incremental progress being made because it's this paralysis as a result of, I'm not sure what the risks are, right? So I think there's something to be said for that. Shamini, I believe you can hear and see us again, which is wonderful. I guess my question to you is, you know, working within the DE&I space, what challenges have you had to overcome? You know, are there specific challenges? Would you like to speak and share a little bit more about those?
Yes, sorry about the technical difficulties here. So I'm 6 months into my role, but have the fortune of being in D&I for about another 3 years. And I think there are really key challenges. There aren't many, but the challenges that I have faced, I think, are quite common across the whole industry. So from data, which I know has been already mentioned, but there is the personal barriers that people have and put in front of themselves. So I'm not the most confident speaker, and I constantly doubt myself if I'm worthy enough, either being in a position or talking to a room of individuals who are looking at me to be the expert in the room. And personally, I think when it comes to D&I, there is a conversation of actually, there is no one individual who is an expert in this, but actually lived experiences provide you with the opportunity to actually share your story. And what I was trying to get at previously in my little bit that I did earlier was about role modeling. It's so key, and it's something that I don't think we see enough of. And in D&I, one of the biggest barriers is actually there aren't many people who I know, especially within kind of the insurance sector or any that I work in, there aren't many people who look like me. And so it's difficult to see yourself, whatever success may be, see yourself succeed in your career. And that's something that I think is a really big barrier, which I know we're on a journey to change, but change takes time. So it's also accepting that this should be a marathon and not a sprint.
Thank you, Shamini. Again, echoing a lot of the themes that have come up from the summit throughout the day is, finding those people, whether we want to call them role models, real models, finding those people who reflect parts of us, right? Who are relatable. And for many people, they don't have access to that kind of representation, which is important, right?
On one point around leadership, Monica in the previous panel talked about lead from where you sit. So breaking a taboo is about making something that was previously awkward comfortable. And British society in particular, there are perhaps more taboos than in some other work cultures, certainly in my experience. So it is incumbent upon every person to be vulnerable in the workplace. That doesn't mean oversharing. That means or making others uncomfortable with the way that with their vulnerability. That means being real, and that is particularly white, middle-aged, cis heterosexual men. You have got to start being more vulnerable, because you are creating that space for those of us that that have minority challenges, or challenges that come from our minority identity, to be also vulnerable and open, and that's how you break down taboos.
And respectful curiosity, right? Which again, a previous speaker spoke to. Ravina, I'm curious to find out from you, in your personal and professional experience, what kind of barriers have you encountered when trying to kickstart these conversations around, menstruation, menopause, mental health, the 3 big M's, if that's what we want to call them?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I was definitely brought up in like an Indian household where, we didn't talk about these things. I mean, I wasn't even really allowed to wear a skirt. My mum would be like, "Would you have to?" And it was a very sort of conservative culture. And I've often been told by people that I don't embarrass very easily, so I will very openly, grab my tampon and off I walk to the bathroom, and you can't be ashamed. But I think kind of one of the biggest obstacles organisationally is probably that piece around just making sure that, as Kat said, that certain demographic who might not have that lived experience, you just want to make sure that they get it. Just they get what you're trying to do. And I think a great way to do that, which we've actually done in S3, is kind of rewarding those behaviors as an equal measure to monetary and financial success. So, for example, one of our ERG leads has done some phenomenal work, and our president in the US actually awarded them a space on the president's trip, which is usually just for kind of sales and high sales achievers. But the work that they did was so phenomenal and so hugely impactful that they were kind of given that same amount of praise. And I think that has made a huge difference to kind of the way that DE&I is positioned within an organization, because quite often now it is a strategic priority, and therefore it does need that backing of everybody. And that for me is one of the big obstacles that we are working and we're overcoming, but making sure that you get everybody on board, because it isn't one person can drive this. I mean, we have a network of over 200 people in our organization, and they are so key in driving out DE&I.
Can I come in here? Thank
Please go
you.
ahead.
So I think one of the things that really stood out while Kat and Ravina were talking was, in terms of breaking down barriers, I think even the language we use around taboo is significant, because sometimes what is a taboo to someone is someone's lived experience. It's just their reality. And so I think even removing that kind of taboo language, still there is a shame and there is a secrecy attached to that. And so that prohibits people from coming forward. It's funny because before this panel, I was speaking to my mom and I was telling her, oh, I'm going to be on a panel about menopause and talking about menopause and menstruation. And she was saying that, sometimes you won't really understand something unless you've experienced it yourself. And I said to her, sometimes you don't have to experience it. You just have to have empathy. You just have to say to someone, I may not understand what you're going through, but I'll let you lead in what you think we need to do. And I think if leaders demonstrated more of that attitude, I think that would be a very good kind of barrier breaking approach.
Can I just jump in there to one thing? So that you've hit the nail on the head, okay, but there is something I think around individuals also. We create a psychologically safe environment, but also making sure that as individuals, we too feel that unashamed of speaking about these things, because I think it's difficult for leaders, especially in the last couple of years, to come forward to have conversations where they are uncomfortable and kind of putting themselves out of the comfort zone, when actually they might be in uninviting environments where people don't want to open up and don't want to speak about things. So this is a really collective movement, right? Like, it's not on the leaders. It has to be a joint thing in organizations for everyone to get involved, for everyone to have these uncomfortable conversations. To Kat's point, without oversharing, but being really vulnerable, falls on not just the leaders, but individuals to also initiate conversations, because you never know. You could turn around and have a chat with your desk neighbor, and it could turn into something so fruitful for both teams that you've never ever thought of before, simply because you've just had this conversation which you never thought you could have in the workplace.
Thank you so much. And just reflecting on what's being said here, the language that we use really is important. And I guess I'm reflecting as an individual here, using the word taboo in and of itself can be considered exclusionary, right? So thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that's an incredibly valuable learning and reflection. So we've already spoken about the pandemic, which all of us have come out of, if we could say that. having survived it for the past 2 years. And I think, you know, it's rather important that we do acknowledge the fact that it has had a devastating impact on gains made over the last decade, for example, for women in the workforce. And, you know, this is reflected in McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report, which they published last year. And their research shows that women are doing more to support their teams and advance DE&I efforts, and consequently emerging as really strong leaders, right? And yet, this critical work that women are doing is going unrecognized and unrewarded. And that, you know, that goes back to Ravina's point, that reward piece. So I guess my question to all of you is, you know, considering the pandemic, has all been lost, or is this really an opportunity for us now to accelerate change?
Well, I don't mind jumping in here. I actually had a really interesting conversation with a colleague just last week about self-promotion. So yes, all the work that maybe women have been doing in the DEI space, especially during the pandemic, feels like, you know, sort of maybe isn't being recognized. But there is also something to say around how many of us put our hands up and actually put ourselves forward to get some recognition for the work that we do. I definitely don't. I'm learning. But I think it's really easy to take feedback and criticism over actually being recognized, and that too, giving ourselves that recognition. If you're having check-ins with your leader, how often do people actually shout about the amazing work and achievement that they've done? I think that changes the conversation within your team to then put yourselves forward and put a bit of, let's say, spotlight on you for the amazing work that you have done. Because sometimes, absolutely, you know, it is on the organization, leaders, those colleagues that you work with to give you the recognition. But actually, there's also something about, you know, we should be proud of the work that we do. We're all here for a reason. We've all got to where we have through our own individual, unique ways. But we're at the table because we've been given the seat. Now it's our job to, you know, put ourselves out there and really decide what do we want to speak about at the table. And I do think there is something about self-promotion here that I don't think all is lost. I think if we just have a bit of belief in ourselves, I think we can definitely pave the future together.
Absolutely, Shamini. And I think, you know, that also, it could be framed as a very British problem, in that I say we because I live here, even though I'm not British, but that doesn't come naturally to us, right? To self-promote and sing our praises. And so also added to that, and I'm just kind of unraveling my stream of consciousness here, is that for many of us, we're not conditioned, right? From a young age, we're learned, or we're told that we can't celebrate and self-promote, right? That's not the right thing to do. That, you know, people will judge, and so you just stay quiet about that. But you're absolutely right. I think that really does have a big part to play. So thank you for sharing that.
One thing, if I can jump in, if that's okay, Dylan. You talked about the pandemic and opportunities. I think whilst there obviously have been catastrophic outcomes for women from the pandemic, one of the opportunities it's given everybody is to create a more flexible working environment. And my personal story is, once I got my menopausal symptoms better under control, I discovered that my ideal workday is 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. So thanks for putting the panel on a bit later. So I never would have really had the opportunity to discover that if we hadn't been, you know, through a pandemic and through this acceptance that just get to your work when you can. which has happened in certainly forward-thinking workplaces. I'm now looking, at roles on the east coast of the US, which I never would have thought of before the pandemic. So I think that there are positivities there, and I think that workforces are generally, it's out there in the zeitgeist that employers are generally much more open to flexibility than they were 2 years ago.
Absolutely. And Oge, do you believe all has been lost, or that there are opportunities here to be leveraged?
Yeah, I do. I don't think all has been lost. I like to think of myself as pragmatic. So, I see things for what they are, but I also try and see the opportunities in them. And I do think we have the ability to leverage some of the things that despite how unfortunate and horrific the pandemic has been, as Kat was saying, we do have the opportunities to leverage some of those things for our own betterment, or for what we want to shape our work experiences to be. I think it's really important that sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I've got it back now. I think it was something Shamini was saying about, sometimes that self-promotion. And for me, I really struggled with self-promoting myself, especially when it came to my accomplishments and my achievements. And something I was talking to with someone earlier this week was about sometimes when people say you can't do something, in some circumstances, I don't think you can do it because you may not have the tools or the resources to be able to do that thing. But it's about having those tools and resources. And I think the pandemic has given us the ability to find those tools and resources to really shape like I was saying, shape our work experiences where that is possible.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've touched upon it, and upon emotional intelligence. Sorry, I also lost my train of thought there. Must be the afternoon. And I guess I just wanted to get a snapshot from each of you on your thoughts. What role do you think emotional intelligence has in all of this, in creating or enabling the change that we want to see? Perhaps I can come to you, Ravina, and you can kickstart us.
Yes, thank you, Dylan. I think I've also lost my train of thought. I think this is contagious now. I think that emotional intelligence is vital because it really is the way forward. It's increasingly becoming one of the most sought after qualities in leaders. And I think that's because authentic leadership is really the way forward. And I think we need to also consider the fact that, everybody's experience is different. As I've said before, that kind of intersectionality piece, which really plays into the emotional intelligence, because there comes a point when you have to realize that I don't know what this is, but I can have the empathy, as we've talked about earlier. That empathy is key because, I don't know if you've heard the phrase that people leave managers, they don't leave organizations. And having a manager with that incredible empathy and emotional intelligence is the best way to create an overall really positive culture. And I think there's a piece there as well around training. And, at S3, 92% of our leaders have been through bias training that we designed in-house, which really means that it is unique to us, because I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. You can't just take something off the shelf and apply it. So by using these like verbatim comments that we've had from surveys and things like that means that we really can tailor it to exactly what our people need. And that's how we can increase, I think, emotional intelligence.
Thank you. And if I may, Ravina, as Gen Z, what you speak to that authentic leadership. What does that look like to you as Ravina?
Yeah, so I think for me, authentic leadership really is just being yourself. I mean, with hybrid working is now kind of the norm. there's not that separation between work and home anymore. I mean, this is my office. We can all see it. You know, everybody's at home. We're really involved in each other's lives anymore. There's not a personal professional line that there once was. And I think it's really involving that. I think if you're on a call and something is horrific, you're talking about something that's really kind of upsetting somebody, or, you know, just a sad call at work, don't be afraid to show that you are upset and that this is sad. And if something is amazing, don't be afraid to do a little happy dance with your colleagues. It doesn't need to be such a strict, stern line anymore. And I think that's the best way, because when you open your heart up, other people will do the same. And that is how we can then move to a place where we are talking about things like menopause, because it builds that trust.
Thank you.
I just want to follow on from what Ravina said. If we're going to do generations here, I'm mid-Gen X. I'm 50 this year, hard to believe. And I think Gen X it is incumbent upon us to really lead by example. The millennials and Gen Z are incredible at this stuff already because, well, they're just great. But we grew up in this era. We have had 30 years in the workforce of this stiff upper lip culture. We've got to change it. We've got to be the change that we want to see and create that space in the workplace. And we've also got to do it in professions where that is still really strong. There may be industry sectors and professions where it's much more common for people to be vulnerable and authentic. There are many others where it's not, and I'm in one as a chief data officer or senior leader. I'm constantly surrounded by let's just say non-vulnerable leadership. I'll leave it at that. So I think we have to really focus on those areas where there's not movement, as well as reinforcing the good, if that makes sense.
And Kat, would you say that many leaders you speak with or partner with see that vulnerability or that vulnerable, authentic leadership as a weakness, and that is what is stopping them from becoming authentic leaders?
I'm not sure it's that black and white. I think it's that they don't know how, for a start. There's internalized shame. Brené Brown's, the guru on this, so just Google her and you're set for life. I think it's also, I think it's that lack of understanding. And also, I think in the hiring and promoting of leadership. So, for example, I'm experiencing as I'm looking for my next role, I'm getting, and what you see is what you get. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback on that, but it's still not being seen as a really critical trait to have in leadership. It's like a nice to have. It's not. So, we'll go with the person with 20 years, Big Four consultancy who, so I just think that it's around, it's not the norm yet. So we've got to make it the norm by leading from the front.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in quickly. Oh, sorry. Okay, go on, please.
No, you were ahead of me. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in and actually say, so if you haven't picked up, I'm someone who likes to take action myself. I believe in I'm the only person who can drive my own career and development. So where, Kat, you mentioned about the older generation really leading by example, absolutely. I think it's really, really vital. I'm also Gen Z, so I think there is something about us being able to see role models who are able to provide us with the space to kind of be ourselves and be as open and challenging as we may be. But there's also something on the younger generation to give leaders also the safe space to be vulnerable. So we go back to what we've previously spoken about. I think there's something around emotional intelligence works both ways. And there is, if anyone has heard the term snowflake, it's a real I'm going to call it a condition, because there is something around the younger workforce sort of being hurt quite quickly, and very, I don't think there are many people who stay in a job longer than a year now, because people get bored really quickly. Whereas if I look to my older colleagues, my mentors, managers who've been in the workforce for, as you say, 30 years, they've been in some jobs for more than 7, 8 years at a time. And that's sort of minimum. But the culture shift in what younger people are now looking for out of the purpose of their job is something that's becoming so prominent. And I think there is something around the younger workforce also just being nice. I just don't think there's enough of that in the world, across humans in general. But it is everybody being really, really inclusive and actually just allowing each other to make mistakes. I think it's so important. I heard the term fail fast a few years back, and it just changed the way I view things. There are really no such thing as a silly question. If you don't know something, you don't know something. So you have to find out somewhere, right? And if you're going to Google, why can't you go to your manager? Why can't you go to your colleague? It's the same thing. I think it's really important to allow for a really safe environment. And in order to do that, it is a joint thing. It's not something that one individual can create. If your leaders are looking to lead by example, fantastic. If you don't understand it, challenge them. Ask them, vice versa. It's the only way that anyone will learn. It's by having these conversations where we're learning from one another.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shaminia. It's that grace and that compassion, right, for one another. Okay.
Yeah, I think because I'm a mid-millennial, I feel like I'm going to meet in the middle between everyone. But I think both what Shamini, Ravina, and Kat have said I think they do hit the nail on the head in the fact of, cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence for me, it seemed like quite new concepts. And then to introduce that into the workplace where you are coming from, generations or cultures of having that stiff upper lip, you don't bring your identity to work. What does that mean? What does that look like? And also being able to have that grace approach that, we're introducing new things into the workplace that haven't been introduced before, and having that like everything being a melting pot and blending. And so there needs to be kind of a meeting in the middle of both of those things. It's not going to happen overnight, but we also need to manage our expectations of what we want to see and what we want to happen. And I think that's a really important thing to take forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm also a mid-millennial, so hey, okay. But I think, we could have a entirely separate panel just on cancel culture. So unfortunately we don't have time to go into that. And while I think there is a time and place for cancel culture when you've exhausted all other compassionate, graceful, friendly options, right, there is a place for that to somehow just enable the change that's needed, that people are demanding. But I think also there is far more introspection that's needed, and questions asked as to the harm that cancel culture can inflict, right? And shutting down conversations, right? Shaming people. I think for a lot of white male heterosexual leaders that I speak to, they see the entire de&i agenda as a shaming force. And that's something that we've really got to shift that, because that's not helpful to anybody, and that certainly is not the purpose of the space and what we're trying to achieve here. So we have just 5 minutes left, everybody. Thank you so much for bringing everything that you have brought to this session. I guess I just want to kind of finish our conversation off by hearing from each of you, what idea or reflection or question or challenge would you like to leave our delegates with? So perhaps I can come to you first, Olga.
I was just thinking. I was just saying in my head, I hope he doesn't come to me first.
Oh, that's okay. I can go to someone else first.
No. I guess what I would want to leave with the delegates is, I guess the quote that I said earlier on, I may not understand what it is that you're going through, but how can you can lead the conversation in this. I will let you lead and have that kind of empathy, and knowing that inclusion and diversity is a messy space sometimes, and being willing to get your hands dirty. I think I would want to leave with the delegates.
Thank you, Olga. How about yourself, Kat?
I was racing through 5 or 6 things without choosing one. I guess if we're thinking about the core purpose of this panel, it's how can we create space for things to not be so-called taboo. And I think that authenticity in yourself is key, and demanding authenticity in your leadership is key. And there are many ways to go about that. And Ravina and Shamini have been key on giving some ideas. But I think for me, authenticity is everything.
Thank you, Kat. Ravina, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Dylan. A favourite quote of mine is Maya Angelou: people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's really important, especially for a leader, because, authentic leadership truly is the way forward, as Kat has just said. And I think the way to do this is, as we say at S3, is to bring your whole self to work, because everyone is welcome at S3.
Thank you, Ravina. And Shamini, how about you?
So mine's a bit of an action for everyone. So DEI, I think events are generally, they're getting larger and larger in terms of turnout, which is fantastic. But a really good question is sort of how many of you actually, is this the first time attending one of these? I'd really, really challenge everybody on this call, myself included, to bring a +1 to another event, a webinar that you go to, because I think we're conscious that, a lot of the time when you talk about all things DEI, you're preaching to the converted, and sometimes you need to bring someone else from outside the room into the room to get their perspectives, to educate them, and so much more, right? And again, as I've been saying throughout, this is a real joint effort, and if you are going to break down these barriers in the workplace, it's a collective effort, which means everyone needs to understand. So I think, bring a +1 to your next event, virtual or in person, and have real conversations in the workplace about what does it mean for you as well as me.
I love that. I love ending on an action, and perhaps we should make that as a rule for our next virtual summit. You can attend, but you must bring a +1. Because you're absolutely right. Often it does feel as though we're sitting in an echo chamber here, and speaking to the people that already get it, right? So how do we open up the space and invite everybody else to and take them on this journey with us? Unfortunately, our time has come to an end, so I just wanted to take this time to thank Olga, Kat, Ravina, and Shamini for your time, for bringing your voice and your perspectives to this conversation. Thank you. I am deeply grateful, as I know everybody else is, who has taken some time out to tune in. Thank you very much. Take care and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.